Elena Vasquez arrived at work every morning at exactly 8:47. Not 8:45, not 8:50, but 8:47. She had timed her commute down to the minute over 3 years of taking the same bus, walking the same 12 blocks, and entering through the same side door of the Meridian Tech Solutions building. The security guard at that entrance was named Luis, and he was one of the few people in the entire company who actually said good morning to her like he meant it. She would take the elevator to the 4th floor, walk past the rows of cubicles where the sales team was already making calls, and settle into her small desk in the corner near the supply closet. Her workspace was neat but forgettable. A small plant that she watered every Monday, a calendar with pictures of places she had never been. A coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Employee," that her younger sister had given her as a joke 3 Christmases ago. Elena was 31 years old, and she had worked as an administrative assistant at this company since she was 28. In those 3 years, she had never missed a single day of work. She had never been late. She had never complained, never asked for a raise, and never caused even the smallest problem for anyone. And in return, almost nobody knew she existed. This was not an exaggeration. There were people on her own floor who had worked 10 feet away from her for years and still did not know her name. They would walk past her desk and nod vaguely, the way you might nod at a piece of furniture that had always been there. She was part of the background. She was the woman who answered the phones when the receptionist was at lunch. She was the one who made sure the conference rooms had enough chairs before big meetings. She was the person who quietly fixed problems before anyone important even noticed there was a problem to fix. Her official job title was Administrative Coordinator, which sounded more impressive than it actually was. In reality, she spent most of her days doing whatever needed to be done, ordering supplies, booking travel for executives, updating spreadsheets that nobody ever looked at, sending reminder emails that people ignored, making copies, sorting mail, fetching coffee for meetings she was never invited to attend. The executives on the 7th floor probably could not have picked her out of a lineup. Richard Brennan, the CEO, had spoken directly to her maybe 4 times in 3 years, and at least 2 of those times he had called her Ellen by mistake. She never corrected him. It did not seem worth the awkwardness. But Elena did not mind being invisible. At least, that is what she told herself. She had learned a long time ago that wanting things too much only led to disappointment. It was easier to expect nothing. It was safer to stay small. The world had taught her this lesson early, and she had been a good student. What nobody at Meridian Tech knew, what nobody in her current life really understood, was that Elena Vasquez had once been someone entirely different. Growing up in a small town in New Mexico, she had been the girl with the gift. That was what everyone called it, the gift. She had started playing piano at 5 years old, picking out melodies on the old keyboard at her grandmother's house before she could even read music. By 7, she was taking lessons from the only piano teacher in town, a retired church organist named Mrs. Delgado, who charged $5 an hour and paid for it mostly in her grandmother's homemade tamales. By 10, Elena had outgrown everything Mrs. Delgado could teach her. She was playing Chopin and Beethoven, sight-reading pieces that should have taken months to learn. Her fingers moved across the keys like they belonged there, like the piano was simply an extension of her own body. Her mother used to stand in the doorway and watch her practice with tears in her eyes. "God gave you something special," she would say. "Don't ever waste it." Elena did not waste it. She practiced for hours every day, even when her hands cramped and her back ached from sitting on the hard bench. She entered competitions and won. She performed at school assemblies, at church services, at community events where people who had never cared about classical music would sit in stunned silence as this skinny girl with the serious face made a beat-up piano sound like something from a concert hall. By 15, she had her whole life planned out. She would graduate high school early. She would audition for the best conservatories in the country. She would study under the great teachers, perform in the great halls, make her mother proud. The gift would become her life, and her life would become the gift. Then everything fell apart. It happened the summer before her junior year. Her father, who had worked at the same auto repair shop for 20 years, hurt his back so badly that he could not work anymore. The injury was permanent. The insurance was terrible. Within 6 months, the family had burned through their savings just trying to keep the house and pay for his medical bills. Elena watched her mother take on a second job, then a third. She watched her younger sister wear the same clothes for 2 years because there was no money for new ones. She watched her father sit in his recliner day after day, his eyes empty, unable to do the one thing that had always made him feel like a man. And she watched her dreams slip away one by one, like water through her fingers. There was no money for conservatory auditions. No money for the travel, the application fees, the special coaching that serious applicants needed. Her piano teacher, Mrs. Delgado, offered to help pay, but Elena knew she could barely afford her own bills. The school guidance counselor suggested scholarships, but Elena understood the reality. Even full scholarships did not cover everything, and her family needed her here, now, not chasing some fantasy in a city far away. So she made a choice. She stopped practicing, she stopped entering competitions, she stopped talking about the future she had always imagined. She finished high school like a normal student, got a job at a grocery store to help with bills, and eventually moved to the city to find better work. The piano stayed behind at her grandmother's house, and Elena told herself it was just temporary. She would go back to it someday, when things got better, when she had time, when it made sense. But someday never came. Things got better slowly, then worse again, then better in different ways. She got her job at Meridian Tech. She found a small apartment she could afford. She built a quiet life that was stable and safe and completely unremarkable, and she bought a piano. It was an old upright she found at a second-hand store, out of tune and scratched up and missing one of the black keys. It cost her $200 that she did not really have, and she spent another $100 getting it tuned. Her apartment was so small that the piano took up most of the living room. She had to squeeze past it to get to the kitchen. But every night, when she came home from work, she would sit down at that broken little piano and play. Not the competition pieces, not the classical showpieces she had once memorized. She played whatever came to her, melodies that appeared out of nowhere, harmonies that felt like conversations with someone she could not see, music that was hers alone, that nobody would ever hear, that existed only in the small space between her fingers and the keys. It was the only time she felt like herself, the real herself, the one she had buried so deep that sometimes she forgot she was still in there. At work, she was invisible. At home, she was alive. And she had accepted, with the quiet resignation of someone who has learned to stop hoping, that these two worlds would never meet. That the person she was at that piano would never be allowed to exist in the fluorescent-lit offices of Meridian Tech Solutions. That some parts of her were simply not meant for daylight. She had no idea how wrong she was. Meridian Tech Solutions was not a famous company. It was not the kind of place that made headlines or attracted the attention of major investors. For most of its 15-year existence, it had been a solid but unremarkable mid-sized technology firm, the kind that did well enough to keep its employees paid, but never quite broke through to the next level. That was about to change. Or at least, that was the plan. For nearly 3 years, the CEO, Richard Brennan, had been working on something big. He had been building a relationship with a man named Haruki Tanaka, the founder and chairman of Tanaka Holdings, one of the most respected investment firms in Asia. Mr. Tanaka was 73 years old, a billionaire several times over, and known throughout the business world for 2 things. First, he had an almost supernatural ability to identify companies that were about to become extremely successful. Second, he was impossible to impress. Dozens of companies pitched to Mr. Tanaka every year. He rejected almost all of them. He was not interested in flashy presentations or aggressive sales tactics. He did not care about projections and promises. What he cared about, according to everyone who had ever worked with him, was character. He wanted to know who he was getting into business with. He wanted to see the soul of a company, not just its numbers. Richard Brennan had understood this from the beginning. That was why he had spent 3 years cultivating the relationship slowly, carefully, never pushing too hard. He had visited Mr. Tanaka in Tokyo twice. He had sent thoughtful gifts on appropriate occasions. He had written personal letters instead of emails. He had done everything right. And now, finally, Mr. Tanaka had agreed to visit Meridian Tech in person. He would spend one day at the company headquarters, meet the leadership team, tour the facilities, and make his decision. If he said yes, Tanaka Holdings would invest $200 million into Meridian Tech. The company would be transformed overnight. New products, new markets, new everything. It would be the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. If he said no, it would all be over. Mr. Tanaka never reconsidered. A rejection from him was permanent. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday in late October. The entire company had been preparing for weeks. Every floor had been cleaned until it sparkled. Every employee had been briefed on proper etiquette. The conference rooms had been stocked with specific Japanese teas that Mr. Tanaka was known to prefer. Nothing had been left to chance. The centerpiece of the day would be a welcome reception on Wednesday evening, the night before the formal meetings. It would be held in the grand lobby of the building, which had been transformed into an elegant event space. White tablecloths, soft lighting, carefully selected flowers, and music. The music was not just background noise, it was a crucial part of the strategy. Richard Brennan had done his research. He knew that Haruki Tanaka had a deep love of classical piano. The old man had studied piano as a child in post-war Japan, and though he had never pursued it professionally, he remained passionate about it his entire life. He attended piano concerts regularly. He donated to music education programs. He had once said in an interview that you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by listening to them play piano. So the plan was simple. A professional pianist would perform during the reception, creating an atmosphere of culture and sophistication. The music would put Mr. Tanaka at ease. It would show him that Meridian Tech understood what mattered to him. It would set the perfect tone for the meetings to follow. The event coordinator, a woman named Patricia who had been with the company for 12 years, had spent weeks finding the right pianist. She had auditioned several candidates and finally settled on a young man who had trained at Juilliard and performed with symphony orchestras around the country. He was expensive, but he was exactly what they needed. Elegant, professional, impressive, without being showy. Everything was in place. Everything was perfect. And then, on Tuesday afternoon, exactly 42 hours before Mr. Tanaka was scheduled to arrive, Patricia's phone rang. The pianist's mother had suffered a stroke. She was in the hospital in critical condition. He was on a plane to be with her and would not be able to perform. He was sorry. He hoped they understood. Patricia did understand. Of course she did. Family came first, but understanding did not solve her problem. She hung up the phone and sat very still for a long moment. Then she started making calls. The first agency had no one available on such short notice. The second agency had one pianist, but he specialized in jazz, not classical. The third agency did not even pick up the phone. She called private music teachers, local universities, anyone she could think of. Nobody could help. It was too soon, too sudden, too impossible. By 6 o'clock that evening, Patricia was sitting in the 7th floor conference room with Richard Brennan and 3 other executives, and she was trying very hard not to cry. "What do you mean there's no one?" Richard said. His voice was calm, but his face had gone pale. "I've called everyone," Patricia said. every agency in the city, every contact I have. There's simply no professional classical pianist available tomorrow night. Then get someone from out of town. Fly them in. I tried. The few people who might be available can't get here in time. And even if they could, they wouldn't have time to prepare. Mr. Tanaka will know the difference between a polished performance and someone who just showed up. The room went silent. Richard stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Everyone knew what he was thinking. 3 years of work, 3 years of careful relationship building, and it might all fall apart because of a piano player. "Can we just skip the music?" one of the executives asked. "Tell him the pianist got sick. He'll understand." Richard shook his head slowly. "You don't know Haruki Tanaka. The music isn't a decoration. It's a message. It tells him we pay attention to details. It tells him we know who he is and what he values. If we show up tomorrow night with no pianist, he'll see a company that couldn't handle a simple problem. He'll wonder what else we can't handle. So what do we do?" Nobody had an answer. Patricia felt sick to her stomach. She had been in charge of this event. She had assured everyone that everything was under control. And now she was the one who had to sit here and admit that she had failed. The meeting went on for another hour, but nothing was resolved. They talked in circles, suggested ideas that went nowhere, blamed people who were not in the room. By the time they finally gave up for the night, the mood was desperate. Patricia gathered her things and walked to the elevator in a daze. She had no idea what to do. She had no backup plan. She had nothing. As the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. This was a disaster, a complete disaster, and there was nothing she could do about it. 4 floors below, in her corner cubicle near the supply closet, Elena Vasquez was still at her desk. She often stayed late, not because anyone asked her to, but because she had nothing urgent waiting for her at home except the piano. She would finish up whatever small tasks remained, then catch a later bus and have the whole evening to play. She had heard bits and pieces of the crisis throughout the day, whispered conversations in the hallway, the event coordinator rushing past looking like she had seen a ghost, something about the big investor visit, something about music, something going wrong. Elena did not know the details. She was not important enough to be included in those conversations, but she could feel the tension in the air, the way everyone on the executive floors seemed to be walking a little faster, talking a little louder, panicking a little more. She finished the last of her filing and reached for her bag. Whatever was happening up there, it was not her problem. She was just the administrative assistant in the corner cubicle. Nobody expected her to solve anything. She turned off her desk lamp and headed for the elevator. She had no idea that by this time tomorrow everything would be different. The next morning, Elena woke up at 6:15 like she always did. She made coffee in her tiny kitchen, ate a piece of toast standing up, and got dressed in her usual work clothes. Gray slacks, a simple blouse, comfortable shoes, nothing that would attract attention, nothing that would make anyone look twice. On the bus ride to work, she stared out the window and thought about nothing in particular. The city moved past her in a blur of buildings and people and traffic. She had made this trip so many times that she barely noticed it anymore. Her body knew the route by heart. Her mind was free to wander. She thought about the piece she had been working on at home, a melody that had come to her a few nights ago, something soft and sad that she could not quite get right. The middle section kept falling apart. She would have to try again tonight. She arrived at the office at 8:47, said good morning to Luis, the security guard, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly the same as every other day, except it was not. She could feel something wrong the moment she stepped off the elevator. The air was different. People were moving differently. There was a tension in the building that had not been there before, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for something terrible to happen. Elena walked to her cubicle and sat down. She turned on her computer and started going through her morning emails. But she kept glancing up, watching the people around her, trying to understand what was going on. Around 10 o'clock, she heard raised voices coming from somewhere down the hall. She recognized one of them as Patricia, the event coordinator. The woman sounded like she was on the edge of tears. "I don't know what else to do," Patricia was saying. "I've tried everything. There's no one available. No one." Another voice, a man's voice that Elena did not recognize, responded with something harsh and impatient. She could not make out the words, but the tone was clear. Blame, frustration, anger. Elena felt a small twist of sympathy in her chest. She did not know Patricia well, but she had always seemed like a nice woman. Someone who worked hard and cared about doing a good job. Whatever was happening, it did not seem fair that she was being yelled at. The voices faded as the conversation moved somewhere else. Elena turned back to her computer and tried to focus on her work, but the curiosity stayed with her. What was going on? What had gone so wrong? At lunch, she found out. She was eating a sandwich in the break room when two women from the marketing department came in, talking loudly to each other. They did not notice Elena sitting in the corner. People rarely did. "The whole thing is a mess," one of them said. "The pianist canceled, and now they can't find anyone else. Brennan is losing his mind. Can't they just play recorded music or something?" Apparently not. The investor is some big deal guy from Japan who loves piano, like really loves it. If they don't have live music, it sends the wrong message or something. I don't know. It sounds crazy to me. So what are they going to do? No idea, but if this deal falls through, I heard there might be layoffs. The company was counting on this money. Elena stopped chewing. Layoffs. That word hit her harder than anything else. She had seen layoffs at other companies, had friends who had lost jobs without warning. The thought of it happening here, to people she worked with every day, made her stomach tight. But there was something else. Something that had started buzzing in the back of her mind the moment she heard the word pianist. She tried to push it away. It was ridiculous. She was not a professional. She had not performed in front of anyone in over a decade. She was just an administrative assistant who played piano alone in her apartment. That was not the same thing. That was not even close to the same thing. She finished her sandwich and went back to her desk. She tried to work. She answered emails, made copies, did all the small tasks that filled her days. But the buzzing in her mind would not stop. Around 3 o'clock, she saw Patricia walk past her cubicle. The woman looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying. She was carrying a stack of folders and talking on her phone, her voice thin and strained. "I understand," Patricia was saying. "Yes, I know. I'm still trying. I'll let you know if anything changes." She hung up and stood there for a moment, just standing in the middle of the hallway like she had forgotten where she was going. Then she took a deep breath and kept walking. Elena watched her go, and something inside her shifted. She thought about her father, sitting in that recliner day after day, unable to do the thing that made him feel useful. She thought about all the times she had stayed quiet when she could have spoken up. All the times she had made herself small, because it was easier, because it was safer, because she was afraid. She thought about the piano in her apartment, waiting for her like it always did. The only place where she felt like herself. And she thought about these people, her co-workers, who might lose their jobs because of something as simple as missing music. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stood up. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were shaking. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to sit back down, to stay invisible, to not get involved. This was not her problem. This was not her place. She was nobody. But she kept walking. She found Patricia in a small office near the elevator, sitting at a desk covered with papers and looking at her phone like it might suddenly save her. Elena knocked softly on the open door. Patricia looked up. Her face was blank for a moment, the way people's faces always were when they saw Elena, trying to place her, trying to remember if they had met before. "Can I help you?" Patricia asked. Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She stood there, frozen, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. What was she doing? What was she thinking? "I'm sorry," she finally managed. I heard about the pianist, the one who canceled." Patricia's expression shifted, a flicker of hope, quickly buried. "Do you know someone? A pianist?" Elena swallowed hard. "I play piano." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Patricia stared at her. "You play piano," she repeated slowly. "Yes. I used to. I studied for a long time when I was younger. I'm not a professional or anything, but I can play. Classical music, I can play classical music." Patricia was still staring. Elena could see the thoughts moving behind her eyes, the doubt, the desperation, the calculations. "How long did you study?" 15 years. I started when I was 5. "Have you performed before? In front of people?" "Yes, a long time ago. Competitions, concerts, that kind of thing. But not in years. I haven't performed publicly in over 10 years. Patricia stood up slowly. "Come with me," she said. Elena followed her to the elevator. They rode up to the 7th floor in silence. Elena had never been to the 7th floor before. It was where the executives worked, a world of corner offices and thick carpets and people who made decisions that mattered. Patricia led her to the large conference room where the crisis meetings had been happening. Richard Brennan was there, along with 3 other people Elena did not recognize. They all looked up when she walked in. "Who is this?" Richard asked. "She says she can play piano," Patricia said. "Classical piano. She studied for 15 years. Richard looked at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time, which, in a way, he was. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena," she said. "Elena Vasquez. I work on the 4th floor, administrative coordinator." Richard nodded slowly. His eyes were sharp, measuring her. "Can you prove it?" Elena felt her mouth go dry. "What do you mean?" "There's a piano in the reception hall. It's already set up for tomorrow night. Can you play something for us right now?" The room was silent. Everyone was watching her, waiting. Elena thought about running. She thought about saying she had made a mistake, that she was not good enough, that they should find someone else. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then she thought about Patricia's red eyes, about the layoffs, about her father in his recliner, about 15 years of practice that she had buried like something to be ashamed of. "Yes," she said. "I can play." The walk to the reception hall felt like the longest walk of Elena's life. She followed Patricia and Richard Brennan down a corridor she had never seen before, past offices with big windows and expensive furniture, through a set of double doors that opened into a space that made her breath catch in her throat. The reception hall was beautiful. High ceilings, polished floors, soft lighting that made everything glow. White tablecloths had already been set up on round tables. Flowers sat in elegant arrangements, waiting for tomorrow's guests. And there, in the corner of the room, was the piano. It was a grand piano, a real one. Black and shining, with the lid propped open like it was waiting for someone to bring it to life. Elena had not seen a piano like this since she was a teenager, since the days when she used to dream about playing in concert halls. She walked toward it slowly, almost afraid to get too close. The executives followed behind her, watching. She could feel their eyes on her back. She could feel their doubt. Richard Brennan cleared his throat. "Take your time," he said. But his voice did not sound patient. It sounded like a man who had run out of options and was hoping for a miracle. Elena reached the piano and ran her fingers lightly across the top. The wood was smooth and cool. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting her position the way she had done thousands of times before. Her feet found the pedals, her hands hovered over the keys, and suddenly, she was 15 years old again, sitting in Mrs. Delgado's living room, nervous before her first real competition. Her teacher's voice in her ear, calm and steady. "The piano is not your enemy, mija. It is your friend. It wants to help you. All you have to do is let it." Elena closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and she began to play. She did not think about what to play. She did not plan it or choose it. Her fingers simply moved, finding the notes like they had never forgotten. The opening of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, soft and tender, each note hanging in the air like a question. For a moment, she was not in the reception hall anymore. She was not a 31-year-old administrative assistant trying to prove herself to strangers. She was just a girl at a piano, doing the thing she was born to do. The music poured out of her. All the years of practice, all the lonely nights in her apartment, all the feelings she had never known how to express with words. It was all there, in her fingers, in the keys, in the sound that filled the beautiful room. She played for maybe 5 minutes. She was not sure. Time had stopped meaning anything. When the last note faded, she sat very still, almost afraid to open her eyes, afraid of what she would see on their faces. The silence stretched on. Then she heard Patricia whisper, "Oh my God." Elena opened her eyes and turned around. Patricia had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. One of the other executives, a man Elena did not know, was staring at her like he had never seen anything like her before. Richard Brennan was standing very still. His face was unreadable. For a long, terrible moment, Elena thought she had failed. She thought he was going to thank her politely and send her back to her cubicle. Then he spoke. "Where have you been hiding?" Elena did not know how to answer that. "Can you do that tomorrow night?" he asked. "For about 45 minutes?" She nodded. Her voice did not seem to be working. "Then you're our pianist." He turned to Patricia. "Get her whatever she needs, a dress, whatever. Make sure she's ready." And just like that, it was decided. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Patricia took Elena shopping for a dress, something simple and elegant that she could never have afforded on her own. The company paid for it. They also paid for her hair to be done, for someone to help her with makeup. Elena barely recognized herself in the mirror. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her old upright piano in her apartment and played for hours, running through pieces she had not touched in years. Her fingers remembered more than she expected. But it was not the classical pieces she kept coming back to. It was the music she had written herself, the melodies that existed only in her head and her hands, the songs that were hers alone. By the time she arrived at the reception hall the next evening, she was shaking. The room had been transformed. Candles flickered on every table. Well-dressed people moved through the space, talking in low voices, sipping drinks. Everything looked like something from a movie, like a world she did not belong in. She made her way to the piano and sat down. A few people glanced at her, then looked away. She was just the background, just the music. That was fine. That was what she was supposed to be. Then the main doors opened, and Haruki Tanaka walked in. He was smaller than she had expected. An old man in an expensive suit, with white hair and a face full of deep lines. But his eyes were sharp and bright, taking in everything around him. Richard Brennan was at his side, talking and smiling, playing the perfect host. Elena watched them for a moment. Then she turned to the piano and began to play. She started with Debussy. Clair de Lune, one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. The notes floated through the room like moonlight, soft and silver and full of longing. She watched people pause their conversations, tilt their heads, listen. But as she played, something strange started to happen. The classical pieces began to feel wrong, too safe, too expected. Anyone could have played them. Any professional pianist could have sat here and done exactly this. Elena thought about what Richard Brennan had said about Haruki Tanaka, that he wanted to see the soul of a company, that he cared about character, not presentations, that you could tell everything about a person by listening to them play. And she made a decision. When Claire de Lune ended, she did not move on to another famous piece. Instead, she let her hands find their own way. She began to play one of her own compositions, the melody she had been working on in her apartment, the one that was soft and sad and never quite right, except now, somehow, it was right. The music filled the room. It was not like anything the guests had heard before. It was not a piece they could name or recognize. It was just Elena, her story, her pain, her hope, her years of silence. All of it poured into the keys. She did not notice when the conversation stopped. She did not notice when people turned to watch her. She did not notice when Haruki Tanaka left Richard Brennan's side and walked slowly toward the piano. She just played. When she finally finished, the room was completely silent. She looked up, blinking, like she was waking from a dream. Haruki Tanaka was standing 3 feet away from her. His eyes were glistening. There were tears on his weathered cheeks. He said something in Japanese to the interpreter beside him. The interpreter leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Mr. Tanaka says he has not heard playing like that in 40 years. He wants to know who taught you." Elena swallowed. "A woman named Mrs. Delgado," she said, "in a small town in New Mexico. She charged $5 an hour." The interpreter translated. Haruki Tanaka listened, then spoke again. "He says the best teachers are not always in the famous schools. He says your teacher must have been very wise." The interpreter paused. "He also says that the music you played at the end, the piece he did not recognize, was the most honest thing he has heard in a very long time." Elena did not know what to say. She sat there, her hands still resting on the keys, feeling like the world had shifted beneath her feet. Haruki Tanaka bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that Elena knew she did not deserve. Then he turned and walked back to Richard Brennan, and the reception continued around her. But something had changed. She could feel it. Something important had happened, even if she did not yet understand what it was. She turned back to the piano and kept playing, but for the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen. Elena did not sleep that night either. She went home after the reception, still wearing the beautiful dress, still feeling like she was living someone else's life. She sat on her couch in the dark and replayed every moment in her head. The way Haruki Tanaka had looked at her, the tears on his face, the words he had spoken through his interpreter, the most honest thing he has heard in a very long time. She did not know what any of it meant. She did not know if she had helped or hurt the company's chances. She did not know if tomorrow she would be thanked or forgotten. All she knew was that for 45 minutes she had stopped pretending to be invisible. She had let people see her, the real her. And it had been the most terrifying and wonderful experience of her life. The next morning, she put on her regular clothes and went to work at 8:47, just like always. Luis, the security guard, smiled at her the same way he always did. The elevator made the same sounds. Her cubicle looked exactly the same as it had 2 days ago, before everything changed. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the air. People were looking at her differently. Some of them were actually looking at her for the first time. A woman from accounting who had never spoken to her before stopped by her desk and said, "I heard you played piano last night. That's amazing." A man from the sales team gave her a thumbs up as he walked past. Elena did not know how to respond to any of it. She just smiled and nodded and tried to focus on her work. But her hands were shaking too much to type. Around 11 o'clock, Patricia appeared at her cubicle. The woman looked different today. She was smiling, actually smiling, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Richard wants to see you," she said. "7th floor." Elena's heart dropped into her stomach. This was it. She would find out if she had saved the day or ruined everything. She stood up on legs that felt like they might give out and followed Patricia to the elevator. The ride to the 7th floor felt even longer than it had the day before. When the doors opened, Patricia led her not to the conference room but to Richard Brennan's private office. It was the biggest office Elena had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, expensive art hung on the walls. And behind a massive wooden desk sat the CEO, looking at her with an expression she could not read. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Elena sat. Her hands were folded in her lap, gripping each other so tightly her knuckles were white. Richard was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "The meeting with Mr. Tanaka ended about an hour ago," he finally said. "It was supposed to take all day. It took 2 hours." Elena felt her heart stop. 2 hours. That was bad. That had to be bad. He had decided quickly because he was not interested, because something had gone wrong, because of her. "He signed the deal," Richard continued. $200 million. The largest investment in this company's history. Elena blinked. She was not sure she had heard correctly. "He told me something interesting," Richard went on. "He said he made his decision last night, during the reception, before we even sat down to talk business." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "He said a company that employs someone with your spirit is a company worth believing in. He said your music told him everything he needed to know about who we are." Elena could not speak. She could not move. She just sat there, trying to process what she was hearing. "I have to be honest with you," Richard said. "Before last night, I did not know who you were. I did not know your name. I did not know you existed. You have worked here for 3 years, and I had no idea." He paused. "That's my failure, not yours." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the desk toward her. "This is a bonus. A significant one. You earned it. But that's not why I asked you here." Elena looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "I want to offer you a new position," Richard said. "We're going to be growing fast over the next few years. We're going to need people who can solve problems, people who can step up when things go wrong, people who have skills we don't even know about. I want you to be part of that. Not as an administrative assistant, as something more." Elena found her voice. It came out small and rough. "I don't understand." "I'm offering you a promotion, a real one. Better title, better salary, work that actually uses your brain. And there's one more thing." He smiled for the first time since she had walked in. "Mr. Tanaka made a personal request. He wants to fund a recording of your original compositions, a full album. Professional studio, professional production, everything. He's paying for it himself, as a gift. He said the world deserves to hear what he heard last night." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. She tried to hold them back, but one escaped and rolled down her cheek. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Richard said simply. She nodded. She could not manage anything else. The months that followed felt like a dream. Elena moved into a new office on the 6th floor, with a window and a door and a nameplate with her actual name on it. She worked on projects that mattered, projects where her ideas were heard and valued. People knew who she was now. They said hello in the hallways. They asked for her opinion in meetings. They saw her, and on weekends she went to a studio downtown and recorded her music. The melodies she had written alone in her apartment, the pieces that had existed only for her, were being captured and preserved. Professional musicians listened to her compositions and told her she was gifted. Sound engineers tweaked and polished until every note was perfect. Haruki Tanaka flew in from Tokyo to sit in on one of the sessions, listening with his eyes closed and that same peaceful expression on his face. The album was released 8 months later. It did not become a massive hit. Elena did not become famous, but it found its audience. People wrote to her, strangers from around the world, telling her that her music had moved them, that it had helped them through difficult times, that it had made them feel less alone. She kept one of those letters on her desk at work. It was from a young woman in Ohio who was studying piano, who had almost given up, who had heard Elena's album and decided to keep going. "Your music reminded me why I started," the letter said. "Thank you for not giving up on your gift." Elena read that letter whenever she felt like she did not belong, whenever the old voice in her head told her she was nobody, that she should stay small, that she had no right to take up space. The letter reminded her that the voice was wrong. It had always been wrong. She still played piano every night in her apartment, but now, sometimes, she played with the windows open. She let the music drift out into the city, let strangers hear it if they happened to walk by. She was not hiding anymore. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about Mrs. Delgado, about her mother standing in the doorway, crying, about her father in his recliner, broken and lost, about all the years she had spent believing that the best parts of herself were meant to stay buried. She had been so wrong. The gift had never gone away. It had just been waiting for the moment when she would be brave enough to share it, waiting for the night when a crisis would give her no choice but to step forward, waiting for her to stop being invisible and finally let the world see who she really was. She had only wanted to help. She had never expected it to change her life. But that is how it works sometimes. The smallest act of courage, the quietest moment of bravery, can open doors you never knew existed. All you have to do is be willing to walk through them. Elena Vasquez walked through, and she never looked back.